Ready to elevate your leadership? Follow Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast now. Transform inspirations into actions. Hit follow and lead with impact. Welcome to Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast, the show where we seek to uncover what leadership means in today's world. I'm Joe Hart, CEO of Dale Carnegie, and we will be talking to diverse leaders with stories to tell across various industries to help unlock your potential for success. We will be sharing real-life insights into leadership, which in turn can help spark the next level of your growth as a leader. Today's guest is a leader at the forefront of youth empowerment and entrepreneurship, driving one of the top 10 most impactful NGOs globally. With a history of guiding 2 startups to acquisition and receiving recognition from esteemed institutions like Harvard Business School, he brings a wealth of experience to the table. He is a distinguished member of the Young Presidents Organization, and his contributions have garnered prestigious awards, including the Tony Hsieh Award and the YPO Global Social Impact Award. In his latest co-authored book, Modern Achievement, he is reshaping the narrative of success for young leaders worldwide. Please welcome the President and CEO of Junior Achievement Worldwide, Asheesh Advani. Asheesh, welcome to the Dale Carnegie Take Command podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. You and I have gotten to know each other a little bit. I mean, we're both in the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches program. You are the CEO of Junior Achievement Worldwide organization, much like Dale Carnegie is. And you've had a really interesting journey that led you up to become the CEO of Junior Achievement in 2015. You were an entrepreneur, you were in the JA program as a teen yourself. But tell us a little bit about kind of the journey that led you to become the CEO of Junior Achievement.
Sure, happy to do so. So I was born in India and I grew up in Canada, and I went through JA when I was in Canada in junior high school. Many of our programs at JA are for young people in elementary school, middle school, or high school, and sometimes now even university. But for me, I went through it when I was in junior high school. But even before I went through the program with Junior Achievement, when I moved to Canada, I developed a stutter, actually, and you may catch me occasionally in this interview stumble on a few words, but it was much worse. I couldn't even get a sentence out when I was between the ages of, say, 6 and 14. And I went to speech therapy once a week at a hospital in Toronto called the Hospital for Sick Kids. I tell that part of my story up front because I do think it's somewhat seminal to understand my journey to JA, because I realized that going through extracurricular activities, particularly like Junior Achievement, where you can build self-confidence as a young person, can really change your career trajectory and make you think differently about yourself. So in my case, that happened at a relatively young age because I sort of went through speech therapy and became better and better at extemporaneous speaking, and gave me an opportunity when I was in school to be a leader in Junior Achievement. And that got me the title of CEO when I was 14 years old, which at the time, just in retrospect, feels like such an important thing that happened, because it's a bit like being president of any student club, really. You get this sense of confidence and respect of your peers that I'd never had before. As I look back upon my life now with the benefit of the sepia haze of nostalgia, I can see the moment where my self-confidence took a step function forward through JA. And then after that, I actually became an entrepreneur. So in my 20s, I started a company. The company was bought by Richard Branson, Virgin, after my running it for 6 years. It was a company called Circle Lending, which is the first person-to-person lending company on the internet. I worked for Richard, learned a lot about how to build a brand from him, which was a great life experience. Complicated time because it was in the middle of the financial recession. And then I did another company, which was bought by Interactive Brokers, a company called Covestor. So my journey really is as a tech entrepreneur, and now I've led JA for well over 8 years now.
I want to go back even to the stutter because you talk about this. You've written a new book called Modern Achievement that's coming out shortly. And in that book, you talk about just even the emotional toll of the stutter. And I'm curious about, as you look back on that, certainly entrepreneurship is not easy. You had some ups and downs in that first business. What are some of the strategies you've learned in your life about being able to overcome adversity?
No, it's a great question. And the emotional toll of the stutter and the emotional toll that comes from really any journey that has ups and downs is something which takes resilience. And the question is, how do you actually build the resilience muscles, frankly, that we all need, given particularly the economy of the future, which will have many ups and downs for many people, whether you're young or not young, you're going to have some ups and downs. I like to say that the data shows that young people are going to have an average of at least 20 jobs and at least 7 careers. And there's no chance with that many transitions that at least a few of them won't be involuntary. So people are going to have to get used to getting fired and get used to that sometimes very traumatic feeling of not being wanted. And my experience with, being an Indian kid in Canada with a stutter when I was, skinny little Indian kid with a funny name with a stutter, let me tell you that, it made it hard to make friends when I was particularly in elementary school, middle school. And I wouldn't call it traumatic, but it was definitely challenging. I tell the story in the book of how I remember being on stage in front of the entire school and having to recite a poem. And it must have taken me what felt like an hour, which was probably just 10 minutes, to read a poem that should have lasted a minute. It was in Flanders Fields, actually. I remember it well. If you know that poem, Remembrance Day or Veterans Day, that is quite commonly shared. Oh my goodness. I really thought the world was coming to an end. Like every parent, every student, every teacher in the room was looking at me as I sat there and tried to get through the poem without being able to get a word out of my mouth or having quick repetitions, which happens sometimes for people who stutter. And I just remember that feeling of disappointing everyone and disappointing even my parents who were not there, but I just felt that I'd let them down as well. It was probably one of my first experiences being on stage in a school environment. And how do you build resilience muscles when you've had experiences like that, right? So it comes back to this idea of self-efficacy. And I'm going to talk more about that, Joe, in the course of our interview today, but I just wanted to hint at it because this idea of self-efficacy and self-belief is so core to resilience in my mind.
It is. And sometimes we overlook that. We'll talk more about it, but define self-efficacy. What do you mean by self-efficacy?
So self-efficacy is more than self-confidence. It's more than self-belief. It's this feeling that you will be successful and having that level of belief and efficaciousness that you'll be able to get through challenges and difficult times. That level of belief can only come when you've already had experiences through learning by doing that allow you to feel that despite the obstacle in front of you, you will overcome the obstacle. And the great thing about this concept is it's immensely teachable and immensely learnable. And I think a lot of people call it mindset, call it these terms that sometimes make it feel like it's going to be very challenging to actually develop. And one thing I've learned from being a JA for a number of years and meeting kids and young people all over the world is to actually see the time it takes and the activities it takes to get a young person going from I can't to I can. I want to share some of those lessons in today's podcast because I do think it's real take-home value. Let me put it that way.
Well, I think it's a very important thing that we'd all like to hear. As a parent, for me and for other parents, often we see the goodness, the greatness that our kids have, or even in a work environment. We may work with team members. You see the potential that people have, but they hold themselves back. And so getting people to be willing to kind of get out of their shell, to take a chance and so forth, because the whole point with self-efficacy is that you have to be able to be willing to try something and then see that you've been successful, and that kind of builds that muscle, as you said. What are one or two of the things that you've seen or strategies that you use with people, even at JA, to help other people start to take those steps?
Yeah, and it's very easy to understand, sometimes challenging to do sort of things. Let me give you one example. So surrounding yourself with people who tell you that you're going to succeed. It sounds so obvious, but it's amazing how your own mindset and your own mental capacity changes when you surround yourself with people who believe in you and tell you. They might believe in you, but not tell you. But if they tell you that you will be successful, I mean, beyond your parents, of course, your mom and dad might say that to you, but other people, your friends, your teachers, your bosses, your mentors, your colleagues at work, if they say, geez, of course you're going to be, CEO one day, or of course you're going to build that project to be an incredibly successful project, you start to go, oh, okay. And then once you hit a difficult moment, you feel your chance of persevering through it goes up because you've had that confidence. That's just one. Now, that's not enough. That's just one. Another is learning by doing. This is where the mastery of skills and competencies actually starts to happen. So for me, being a CEO at the age of 14 for a little student business starts to make you realize, I've done it then, so of course at the age of 20-something, I can do it again. Or put differently, if you haven't done it when you're in your teens, the idea of you magically waking up one day at the age of 25, 26, 27 saying, I'm going to quit my job and be CEO of my own startup, it's a little harder. So learning by doing is the second. And I'll pick one more. There's a few more, but I'll pick one more here, which is being able to turn negative thoughts into positive thoughts. This is something which, as you know from your own readings, Dale Carnegie has also spoken about, but this idea of using gratitude to be able to build a muscle of looking for the positive in things. We do this with my kids. You probably saw if you read part of Modern Achievement, I do talk about things I've done with my own kids as well, not just things I've learned from JA youth around the world. One thing we do as a family, which is 3 gratefuls, we call it. 3 things we're grateful for. There is magic in the number 3. Because by the time you get to the second or third grateful, you're turning a neutral thing or a negative thing into a positive. Even though I didn't win the soccer game today, I had a chance to play with my friends and really enjoy myself after school. It really starts to build this muscle. For Dale Carnegie, he talked about giving frequent praise all the time. I think one of the hidden benefits of that, beyond the thing you do for others, is the fact that you yourself start to look for the positive everywhere. And I've certainly seen it even in my own JA journey, so I like to share this with others. One way to build self-efficacy is to give frequent praise and show gratitude.
It would seem like when we think about leadership, right? Leadership is about bringing the best out in other people and so forth. I mean, the essence of leadership is that we're going to encourage and help people develop that level of self-efficacy. People who are confident typically perform better than people who are not. So as leaders, how do we do that? You talked about gratitude. And for my kids, I've always said that's the most important quality probably that you have is gratitude. It's hard to be unhappy and grateful at the same time. But when we start to think about what are the things, and I love the 3 gratefuls. That's a good tip from you. We're talking about leadership, really. How would you define leadership? If you're to put leadership in one sentence, what does being a leader mean to you? And how do you encourage other people to be leaders?
Great question. And I think any of your listeners will be hopefully interested in this. So I've learned that the definition of leadership I had when have used that definition of leadership. My impression at that time, I was in my 20s and maybe early 30s, was leadership was being the person in the room with the best idea, right? It was kind of being right. And particularly when you're the founder or the majority owner or your company's been acquired at a young age, people think you're right all the time. And they keep telling you how right you are, so you start to believe it. Very unhealthy. I learned a lot from my next company where I was hired to run the company by the VCs. So there, it wasn't about my ideas being right. It was about surrounding myself with people where we could have a discussion and the best idea would win. So it was about really facilitating great dialogue amongst peers. But at JA, it's a very different kind of entity. It's a much larger entity, much more global entity. And there's no way we could get everyone around the table to always debate about every topic. So my definition today of great leadership is about removing obstacles so others can succeed and getting out of our own way at times. Like physical problems, sometimes they're just mental issues which require a little bit of a mindset shift. So that's my definition of leadership for you.
So what would you say the biggest obstacle is to applying or living that definition? If the goal of leadership is to remove obstacles, and I don't disagree with you, I happen to think that so much of this is about bringing out the best in other people. So what are the obstacles? What are the things that you have seen that get in the way of that kind of approach to leadership?
Well, I think the natural tendency of any leader, particularly one who has to report to somebody else, whether it's a board or to a boss, is to set expectations. When you set expectations, And then you can't meet those expectations because of a constraint either in the world, there's a war, or there's a pandemic, or something even smaller, like somebody didn't do their job well. That's where it's hard as a leader to remind yourself that you're not trying to be right. You're not trying to be didactic, teaching everyone your way is the right way. You're trying to help them succeed and remove obstacles which are getting in the way of their success. And if you do that for enough people in your organization, the entire organization's lifted up. And that's, I think, challenging. And I'll speak for myself as opposed to others. It's challenging to remind yourself that your job is to be curious and listen, and to use some of the latest framing around this, stay above the line versus below the line, if you're familiar with conscious leadership groups work. I love that framing. It's a good reminder that, if you're above the line, you're curious. If you're below the line, you're trying to be right. So I like to remind myself to always be above the line. It's a nice, simple way to remember when you're dropping into the wrong place. I think the reason why we need all these tools is it's natural for humans to want to prove that they're smart or prove that they're right or to defend their turf. Because there's a natural tendency to do that, you have to constantly remind yourself that actually in the long run, it's better to be curious, to empower others, and to remove obstacles in their way, as opposed to trying to tell them which way is the right way.
If we can do that, that's definitely going to get to better results. I mean, the challenge I think that can often happen is people do get insecure, they get fearful, they get impatient, we can lack humility, and then all of a sudden we want to tell people how to do things and so forth. And we know that that's hugely undermining. So many of the great CEOs we've had on the show have talked about just the importance of humility and curiosity, the same kinds of things that you're talking about as essential parts of leadership. You talked earlier, a few minutes ago, about Dale Carnegie's influence on you. I know in your book, Modern Achievement, which I'd like to ask you about in a moment, you talk about Dale Carnegie. Speak a little bit to how the Dale Carnegie philosophy, the Dale Carnegie principles have influenced you relative to leadership and life.
How to Influence and Influence People, of course, is the famous book. And I know that Dale Carnegie's done more than that. But as a kid, when I was actually in high school, that book was given to me as a gift. For whatever reason, I think kids in high school, this is one of my challenges, frankly, at JA. The percentage of kids in high school who lean into personal improvement is relatively low. And part of it is the formats and frameworks we come up with are typically written by adults. Like, to be given a book in high school today seems a bit odd. In those days, it wasn't odd, but yet I didn't read the whole book. That probably tells you something. And I was a pretty personal development-oriented kid, let me tell you. Having said that, I returned to the book in graduate school. So I went to grad school in England, and because I was doing a PhD, I had a lot of time. I didn't have coursework daily with homework daily. I had time to reflect and time to read. So I returned to the book in my late 20s, mid-20s, I guess. It was mid-20s. The thing I remember most, and the part of my life that's probably been influenced most, is the advice to be genuinely interested in others. It's such a simple thing. When you hear it, it dawns upon you and it truly changes your behavior, right? It's just like you did at the beginning of this interview. I know this interview is about me, not you, but you started off this meeting with asking me about my kids and asking me about the parts of my life that you find genuinely interesting. And that is a very endearing thing to do to build a relationship. I've really taken that to heart in many of my relationships. In fact, in my book, in Modern Achievement, I draw upon that in many different parts of the book. In fact, Mark Thompson, Joe, I don't know if you know Mark Thompson. He's a colleague of Marshall Goldsmith as well.
I'm not sure we've met. I don't think we have.
So Mark Thompson is a contributor to Modern Achievement. He was my coach, my executive coach. He's been a coach to lots of famous people, and I'm very lucky to have had a chance to spend time with him. I used to think executive coaching, by the way, was remedial. I used to think like the kind of leaders who need an executive coach were like the people who'd failed, whose boards told them, hey, you need a coach, you're really messing up. Oh my goodness, how wrong was I? I learned so much from Marshall and Mark and all the other members of the coaching profession. And Mark was really the first to teach me, I would say, this idea of being genuinely interested in others can be taken to a whole new level when you are an adult and running a company or running an organization. So we did a 360 for me. And the part of my 360 I scored lowest on, ironically, was cultivate individual talents. So, of course, I was doing these other things, really focused as a new leader at JA, trying to get things done, change, modernize, etc. But the thing I'd forgotten was this really important lesson, which is focusing on the individuals in the organization to cultivate their unique talents. He said, pick that one. Pick that as the thing you want to work on and tell your entire team that that's the thing you're going to work on. Stakeholder-centered coaching is what Marshall Goldsmith has created. This is an element of stakeholder-centered coaching is you listen to all your stakeholders, you pick one thing to improve, you tell everyone that's the one thing you're going to focus on improving. So I told everyone that's what I'm going to improve. And what I did was I got everyone coaches. Whoever wanted a coach got a coach to help them get the talents that they wanted to invest in to grow. And that one little thing that Mark Thompson told me about allowed me to remember this idea of being interested in others' goals. In retrospect, I'm so glad that happened because it really, I think, did help the organization and it helped the people I work with to be happier and more productive.
It helped them and it helped you. And I can see just even as you tell the story, it kind of brings you to life a little bit when you really take an interest in someone, when you care about someone, when you bring out the best in other people. And, we can always learn from others. Dale Carnegie quoted Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, every person I meet is my superior in some way. And that I learned from him. We always learn from other people and help them grow. It's certainly a fun aspect of leadership if we embrace that. And speaking of leadership, you've written the book, Modern Achievement. One of the things you said in the book is that modern achievement is a process in which success and fulfillment come from the journey, not just the attainment of goals and objectives. What would you say about that?
Yeah, so if you think about most achievement books that are written historically, they typically are very much about long-term goal setting, visualization, and having the universe help you accomplish that goal through a philosophy of abundance. That's a very standard formula of many achievement books. Brian Tracy's book, Maximum Achievement, which is one of the famous ones in the past, is a good example. And I think what's happened in the world is we now live in a world that is moving much faster than that world. A world where AI is going to displace what the World Economic Forum says 44% of the skills in the next 5 years are going to be obsolete because of AI, and we're going to replace 44% of those skills. So in a world that's that dynamic, the idea of long-term goal setting, it has to change. And the definition of achievement as accomplishing a long-term goal, I think, feels outdated. So when Marshall Goldsmith and I sat down and started to think about what is more relevant for young people for today, we realized, and particularly because Marshall himself had written a book called The Earned Life, both of us, upon reflection, look back upon our journeys. The source of our happiness was not the goal attainment, but the journey itself. So having multiple goals that allow you to react to new information and circumstances is perhaps a better definition of achievement now than long-term goal setting. Now, I say in the same breath that it's not like we're saying don't have goals. It's actually good to have many goals that you change, but the journey and the process matters as much as the goal attainment.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes we can get so fixed on the goal, but then with hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight, we can really see the value of the journey and the experience and the people along the way and the ups and the downs. I can just think about many challenges and failures in my life that in hindsight were all part of this overall development and the richness of life and who I am. And you've got this concept, which I think is really a very important one. I'd love to have you share this with our listeners, this fixed, flexible, freestyle approach to achievement, which you really started to touch on a little bit. But could you define what you mean by fixed, flexible, and freestyle approach to achievement?
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing we realized is in coming up with lessons for young people, there's some lessons which are timeless that really don't change no matter what happens in the world. And there's some lessons that change based on where you live, whether you live in Africa, India, Europe, the Bay Area, and also change based on what age you are, what time you're looking at this in. As I said, a book I received at the age of 14 may not have been as relevant to me until I was 27. Time is a variable and places are a variable. So that's flexible. So fixed is true all the time. Flexible changes based on time and place. And freestyle are lessons which are really based on your unique strengths. So it may not be true for everyone, but it's based on your unique strengths as an individual. So that framework allowed us to really make more sense of these lessons and be a little bit more honest and authentic that what we're writing isn't true for everyone. And we certainly, given how diverse the world is, recognize, one of the other sort of elements of this book is really want to modernize the definition of achievement to be more acceptable to a globally diverse audience. And so we really wanted to lean into the fact that there are variations on what we say. And this fixed, flexible, freestyle framework is one which I've used at JA as well. So we at JA are a very diverse global organization, and there's some things that are globally fixed, many things that are regionally flexible. Things that are true in Europe might be different than things that are true in Africa, time and place again. And things which are locally freestyle. These are things that are developed based on the unique strengths of our teams in different parts of the world. And of course, school systems are very different all over the world. So it makes sense that we'd have a lot of, very bottom-up programs and materials and processes and practices.
So how do I apply this mindset? If I say, this makes sense to me, I understand kind of how this works. If I'm listening to this podcast, what would be my one takeaway about how I really use this in my life?
At any point in time, you're going to get a piece of advice from somebody. And I think it's going to be up to you to determine if that advice is timeless or if that advice should vary based on time and place, or if that advice is unique to only you. Often, particularly when you get advice from people who are very close to you, the advice you're getting is based on your unique strengths. So one very simple sort of use case of fixed, flexible, freestyle for a listener, let's say, somebody who's getting advice from their parents or their friends or their colleagues or their boss, is to try to understand which of the three that advice falls into. And we try to do that as honestly as we can in the book with fixed, flexible, freestyle. And then conversely, I think if you're somebody who's giving advice, you also should, I think, use it as a framing for how you are determining whether what you're giving should apply to one person or a group of people or everybody.
That's great. That's great. Very helpful. Thank you. Junior Achievement, you are supporting how many kids a year? 10 million? Millions and millions of kids.
We just passed 17 million student learning experiences per year. So it's quite significant growth in over 115 countries. So, really proud of the teams, my colleagues around the world that enabled this to happen.
That's incredible impact. You're doing amazing work. I know that this book and the things that you're teaching in Modern Achievement will be very valuable to young people. I've read your book. I've given an endorsement to your book. I think it's a phenomenal book. I would encourage people to check it out. How would people do that if they want to do that? If I want to pick up Modern Achievement, where can they get that?
Well, you can get it at modernachievement.com, which is the website for the book, or you can get it at Amazon or any book retailer where you live. It should be available now.
Okay, sounds good. You've co-authored Modern Achievement with Marshall Goldsmith. Marshall is one of the greatest thinkers, certainly of our time, a prolific author, and really just an inspiring person. If you could boil down everything you can from your relationship with Marshall, what's the one thing that you really take away or you learn or appreciate most about him?
Marshall has the ability to provide tough love in a very direct way, which is exactly what you want in a great coach. I could share example after example of where Marshall's called me out and said, Asheesh, you're not doing enough of this, you're not doing enough of that, in a way that I know he cares about me, I know he loves me, so it's okay for him to say it. And for him to build that relationship and rapport with people so quickly that he can give that tough feedback, I think is just a special feature of what makes him so good. One thing he told me, just to give you an example, I was very reticent to include stories of my life in the book. Because, I also lead Junior Achievement. I didn't want to make the book about me. I wanted to make it about young people I meet. And he said, Asheesh, you need to kick all that Oxford stuff out of you and not be so reticent to share examples from your own life. I remember he said that to me early on in the project. And now, as somebody who's read the book, Joe, you probably know this as well. It becomes a richer book when you're more authentic about your own stories and you're vulnerable about yourself.
It's the most important part of the whole thing. And you were in the book. And I think that's part of what enabled me to really get more into the book and really even trust the advice that you were giving. I mean, sometimes people will give advice and it's just theoretical or it's abstract, but when you started with that story about you reading the poem and just the struggle that meant to you, hey, that's very real. And all of us can relate to many of the challenges that we have. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. We struggle. We're embarrassed and so forth. So when we have a foundation of trust and caring, we can say almost anything to someone because they know the heart from which it comes. So when Marshall says something like that, it's all in the spirit of trying to help. If we can build trust is the foundation with people. It goes back to what you said. If we're genuinely interested in other people, we take time to care and to listen, we appreciate, we value, that's authentic relationship. If we can do those things, then, we can help ultimately go to that goal of really helping people remove obstacles and so forth, because they know that our interest is their interest. We're trying to help them.
Exactly. Well said.
Something I've started to do with the podcast, Asheesh, is I've gone to ChatGPT, which I did prior to our interview, and I asked ChatGPT, I said, look, I'm interviewing Asheesh Advani, CEO of Junior Achievement Worldwide. What are some questions you'd ask Asheesh? I got a number of questions, very good questions. I said, if you could ask only one question to Asheesh Advani, what would that one question be? I'm going to give you that question right now. And I think you answered parts of this, but here's the question from ChatGPT. What fundamental belief or principle do you prioritize above all others in your leadership journey? And how has it consistently guided you through the diverse challenges and decisions you've encountered in your career?
ChatGPT is a tough interviewer, I got to tell you. My goodness. I would say the advice from Dale Carnegie that I started this interview with, which is to be genuinely interested in others, I think would be the most important element today for what will help us thrive during an age of AI, where the human connection between people will become so much more important than the content of what we say. So just like if AI had asked me all the questions that you asked me today, it wouldn't have been as compelling an interview because AI is not as genuinely interested in me as you are. So I think, once again, I'm going to rely on Dale Carnegie's wisdom in my answer to this question.
Okay, well, both ChatGPT and I would say it was a phenomenal answer, of course. But no, I mean, it's really true. And I think maybe even more important than ever is how do we build on our ability to connect with people empathetically? How do we really appreciate and listen and value and respect people? Particularly, as you said, the World Economic Forum, 44% of skills changing and being, potentially eliminated over some period of time. The things that remain are the things that make us uniquely human, those skills that are around the creative and the emotional and the social. So very, very important. Asheesh, a tremendous interview. Really appreciated you being with me today.
It was my honor. It's so good to see you.
You too. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast. Check out our resources at www.dalecarnegie.com for more research, insight, and tools that will support your success and help you take command of your leadership potential. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating it and following us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For more exclusive content, subscribe to our Dale Carnegie YouTube channel and follow us on social media. As always, thank you for listening, and we're looking forward to you joining us for the next episode of Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast.